What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It is Henry Zamota and my very good friend, Danny Abdel-Jabbar. What's up, man?
Chilling, man. As per usual. How about yourself?
I'm pretty tired.
Yeah.
I feel like I say that a lot. It's not an energetic way to start out the show. I'm tired.
No, definitely not. But like for the folks that are just tuning in for the first time or just learning about us, like we're sitting in our respective offices. It's 9 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Atlantic Standard Time. For us, we've both had an entire day job that we just finished. Henry just has a brand new kid. So yeah, Henry can say he's tired. Eventually tired. We'll get into the groove where we're not tired, but that groove is not yet established.
I've been saying that before I had a kid, though. I'm tired, man. How you doing? I'm sleeping and I'm nodding off a little bit, but we're going to do it. No, I'm always excited to do these shows and speak with you. And I'm always excited for people to listen. So, yeah, obviously for the past month now, we've been talking about the situation in Gaza. So we thought it would be interesting to look at some other terror attacks in Israeli history and really see where there are parallels. And obviously the big one that everyone knows, and the one that I grew up learning about or reading about, or that has been probably the most memorialized, has been the 72 Olympic hostage crisis, where the Munich Massacre, where they made a movie about it maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But that was something that I learned pretty young. Probably I learned about that prior to 9/11. So I think we should start there. There's obviously been plenty of terrorist attacks in Israel, or this didn't take place in Israel, it took place in Germany. But I think
attacks
it's a good,
on Israelis. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good place to, not start, obviously, but it's a good topic to examine. And for a number of reasons, because, this actually involves topics that we hit on prior to, about Cold War politics. Bader Meinhof is involved. The Red Army faction is actually involved in this story, which we did a whole series on earlier this year. So it's kind of just a strange story. And I think at the end of this, we should try to draw parallels, specifically the parallels between the Israeli action of this attack now versus their counter-terrorist measures in the past, because they seem very, very different. So I want to draw comparisons and also
contrast
differences between both both events and how the Israelis responded. And of course, they're both totally different types of events. They're both terrorist attacks, but there's some key differences. One being that I guess the most obvious one is that essentially an army or a division or a battalion crossed the border, and the death count was way higher in the October 7th attack. This took place in Israeli soil. The other one, I believe the total death count was 11, if I'm not mistaken. 11, and I believe a West German police officer died, so that's 12 total. And this takes place, in not Israeli territory. It takes place in West Germany. But needless to say, I want to draw those differences prior, before someone's like, you can't compare October 7th with the Munich Massacre. I just want to draw those up. But why don't we start with kind of the basics, like what is the Munich Massacre? Sure.
Yeah, I found this story very fascinating. Like you, I remember learning about it in school, and then kind of the topic just dropped to the wayside because there's a million other terrorist attacks that were kind of like much larger and louder, like 9/11 as an example, have happened since, and there's been multiple wars, like or skirmishes between Israel and Palestine. So this one kind of gets overshadowed a little bit, but it's a very interesting story, and it's it's a fucked up story. It's a sad story, but it's also just like an interesting case study to bring up, especially when we're thinking about and trying to contextualize, how like you said, the Israelis are responding in Gaza today versus the types of the decisions that they made and the types of responses that they had after the massacre of Munich. So the story is pretty straightforward. 4 a.m. on September 5th, 1972, a Palestinian terror group called Black September launches this operation to capture some Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics. And there were 8 gunmen that jumped the fence at the Olympic Village and gained access to apartment 1, which is where some of the Israelis were being housed using a stolen passkey. One of the Israelis, Youssef Gutfreund, 275-pound wrestling referee guy. He was staying in that apartment at the time, and he starts hearing these Arab-sounding voices outside of the door, and he pretty much figures out what's going on. He's like, "Oh shit, something's about to happen." So he alerts his roommates, and he eventually puts himself in front of the door, trying to hold the door closed to prevent those Arabs from getting in. And he wasn't able to hold the door for more than a few seconds, but it was enough time to let one of his roommates escape. So one person got free, but eventually the terrorists did get in, and they were able to take 5 hostages, including Gutfreund. And after capturing the first 5 hostages or so, the terrorists kept looking around the complex, looking for more Israelis, to take hostage. And they ultimately end up capturing 6 more athletes from the 3rd apartment in the complex. And at the time, this is an interesting story. The wrestling coach, Moshe Weinberger, he actually wasn't in the complex, and he ended up coming back right when the terrorists were capturing his fellow athletes. And this big fight breaks out, right? Weinberger knocks out a terrorist. The second terrorist ends up shooting him in the face, but he doesn't die from that injury. And instead, he turns around and knocks out a second terrorist before ultimately he ends up getting shot multiple times in the chest by a 3rd terrorist. Fatally. Weinberger, this guy is total badass, definitely a hero. But the result of that fight was that one of his teammates was able to escape out of the kitchen window. Another guy though, Yusuf Romano, he failed to get out. He wasn't able to get out that kitchen window, and he instead grabs a kitchen knife and stabs a terrorist in the forehead, which is wild. But he ends up getting shot at point blank range, and that was also fatal by another terrorist. And basically, this is crazy story. It's just we're, especially when we're thinking about the shit that happened on October 7th, it's kind of evokes a similar kind of emotion when you're thinking about it. But there's a lot of differences here, and I'll start. This is where the story starts deviating a little bit. All this fighting is happening, and they're shooting and people dying, and all this is happening for an hour before any authorities show up. And if it wasn't for the 2 that who escaped, that actually managed to get out, it might have even taken longer. But we'll talk more about some of the ineptitudes a little later. But by the time the cops showed up, the Arabs produced a list of demands. They were written in English, and they also threw Weinberger's body in the street to basically show hey, we mean business. The demands from the group was basically what they wanted. They wanted 234 Arab and German prisoners that were held in Israel and West Germany to be released in exchange for the hostages that they did take. And notably, among those Germans that they were trying to free were Ulrike Meinhof and Andreas Baader from the Red Army faction, the leaders of that German-based Baader-Meinhof gang. And Henry, you had mentioned this earlier. We did a couple episodes in the beginning of the year on these guys. Fascinating story, really interesting stuff. We won't be getting into that here, but
I think it's worth just giving a little bit of context to why they were demanding Germans. The old conflict between the Jews and Arabs or Palestinians was very much a Cold War battlefield, meaning that the PLO and Fatah and I don't know the extent of the Black September, their connection with like Fatah is kind of vague. We don't know for sure like if Arafat was like kind of the leader of this group or if they acted on their own or whatever. I don't think we know to this day if like the connection.
I mean these guys
probably were.
They sprung out of like when the Jordanians were basically in control of the West Bank, and then the Jordanians ended up massacring a bunch of Palestinians in September, and that's where the name comes from, Black September.
Yeah, they also assassinated the Prime Minister of Jordan.
Yeah, unclear if they were directly related or not, but it's plausible that they were.
Yeah, so I mean they were involved in a lot of militant activities, but in the 70s and the 60s, and this is one of the reasons why the Israelis at the time, they favored Islamist groups more than secular socialists. I mean, these guys weren't secular because they were still Muslim, but they were, they were acting they were acting within like that leftist Cold War framework. Let's just put it that way. And, they were financed by the Soviet Union. So Israel is a Cold War battlefield. And it's kind of one of those reasons why I think there is, or at least one of the primary reasons why this major affinity for Israel was so high, especially in like the 60s and 70s, because prior to that, most people weren't like pro-Israel or anything. They were like, what? That really starts to happen in the 60s and the 70s as it becomes a battlefield for the Cold War. So I think it's important to note that because the Red Army faction is a terror organization that's based out of West Germany, and they are financed by the Soviet Union and
they're a socialist, left-leaning, radical group, right?
Yeah, a socialist, left-leaning, leftist radical group that used to pull off bank robberies and bombings and
trained with the PLO.
Well, they would train with the PLO, so they would go down to Jordan, and they would get their military experience by training with the PLO because they wouldn't be able to get that experience in West Germany. So I think it's important context because people are wondering why the hell would there be a German who is
why does the Palestinians trying to free the Germans, right? Yeah. But
it's just like a very different battle.
Right.
I mean, it is the same battle that it is now. Like now it's really just kind of like a battle of an occupation of like an oppressor versus the oppressed, but at some point you could really look at it in the lens of the Cold War. Not to take away the oppression aspect out of that time period either, but you know what I'm saying. Israel was sandwiched between two superpowers.
Then.
Yeah. But
sure.
Okay, continue.
So yeah, anyway, if you want to learn more about the Baader-Meinhof gang, they were like the first episodes that we recorded for this year, so you can go back to our backlog and check those out. Very fascinating shit. But back to this story. So the Black September guys, they're asking for 234 Arabs, a couple German prisoners to be swapped, and they were also demanding 3 planes to escape, and that once their Arab and German prisoners were released, that they would send the Israelis back on one of those planes. And from here on out, like, we just see kind of a mix of bad luck, worse politics, and just complete and utter ineptitude that basically starts to make this story a real crazy roller coaster, as if it wasn't already. Okay, so there's this guy that we need to know about. His name is Manfred Schreiber. He was put in charge of the hostage crisis at the time, and he was the Munich police commissioner, and he was also officially appointed the chief of the Olympic security forces, or really lack thereof. I'll talk more about this later. But his job was basically be the coordinator between the terrorists, his superiors in Bonn in the federal government, the West German government, and also the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. And also the German Chancellor, Willy Brandt, right? So he was like the middleman between all those folks, and Willy Brandt did most of the politicking with Golda Meir, as was expected, but Golda Meir made it super clear that she, and by extension Israel, would not negotiate with the terrorists, and that basically got Schreiber off to a rough start, because there was just never going to be any negotiations to be had on the Israeli side. But somehow he and the West German police negotiators were able to successfully extend 3 deadlines that the terrorist outlined, like for when they would need an answer before they start killing people. That was kind of like the first hurdle was like, okay, shit, Israel doesn't want to play ball. The second hurdle was that the terrorists start asking for a jet to go to Cairo instead, specifically, where they would do the prisoner swap. But the Egyptian government apparently also didn't want to support the West German police action, which was kind of a bit of a blocker. They were like, nope, we're not taking them. We don't want to help. We're not going to help the West Germans. And so Schreiber basically figures at this point that there's literally no other option.
This is obviously prior to the time of Mubarak and Sadat as president. Right. And Sadat, this is the year before the 73 war. Mm-hmm. So there's still a very big hostile relationship between Egypt and really the rest of the West. And,
that's correct.
The 73 war becomes a Cold War battlefield as well.
Right.
So different geopolitical landscape.
For sure. So, like I said before, Schreiber basically figures that there's no other option at this point other than to try and launch a rescue mission of those hostages, because Israel doesn't want to negotiate and Egypt doesn't want to play ball either. So Schreiber figured the only way to pull off some kind of rescue mission is to keep the terrorists in Germany at all costs. And so they come up with this kind of crazy plan to corner the terrorists at Germany's like Fürstenfeldbruck airport, which was I think it was like 15 miles or something like that from the Olympic Village. And they basically told the terrorists like, hey, we're gonna go ahead and fly you to Cairo, even though the Egyptians never agreed to that. That was just the pretense to get them to go to the airport. And that once they were at that airfield, the West German sharpshooters would basically attempt a hostage rescue operation. Or at least that was the plan, right? After some back and forth about how to move that group from the to the airport from the village, they settled on a secure bus that drove them to some helicopters, a pair of helicopters, and then that pair of helicopters were supposed to take them to the airport. And then this collective group, right, the Black September guys and their captives, they get on 2 modes of transportation to get to the airport, right? The bus and the helicopters. And when they arrived, this is the time that the German police only then realized that there were actually 8 terrorists instead of the 5 that they were estimating. Why is that a problem? Because they only positioned 5 snipers for the rescue. So 8 terrorists, 5 snipers. So kind of a little bit of a debacle.
So they should have had 8 a sniper for each terrorist,
at least. But we'll talk more about that. We'll talk more about that later. But
because I guess the logistics are I'm no first responder or military man, but I guess even if they take out all 5 of those snipers, take out a militant, then that leaves
there's still 3 left over.
The other 3 to kill everyone else, right?
Right. It's just a math problem, right? And that's if all 5 hit their mark exactly on the money and like totally neutralize those people in that moment, right? So it's like a lot of shit that could go wrong. So even if there were only 5 terrorists, 5 snipers still wasn't enough, right? But
so you probably need, I guess, like military guys or cops who are listening to this can probably answer that, but I'm assuming you need like 3.
Yeah, 2 to 3.
Right,
is
2 to 3 per guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I mean, if they had 2 to 3, assuming 5, right, then they would have 10 to 15 snipers. And if they then realize, oh shit, there's 8 terrorists, well, then they could still squeeze out of the 10 to 15 snipers. They'd at least have man-to-man coverage, right? That would have been a good idea. So, first bad idea, but we'll talk about all the issues later. It wasn't just this sniper debacle that made this operation kind of doomed. The German police set up some dummy airplanes at the airport and like staffed them. I'm saying staffed with like quotes here, because the staff that they had were just cops dressed as flight attendants and crew members. And this was basically the shitty trap that they laid, like not enough snipers and a dummy airplane with some cops. They're like posing as flight attendants. Somehow at this point, inexplicably, at the last minute, the flight crew, the cops, just voted to abandon their mission and they just left the plane and they left it totally empty. And then the terrorists noticed that the plane was fucking empty. And that was like super fishy for them. They're like, who's flying the plane? So they double backed to the helicopters, but that put them in the positions that they were supposed to be in for the snipers, and then the snipers opened fire on these terrorists, and they missed. And this full shootout erupts after this, and this initial firefight lasts about an hour and 15 minutes. It's a long gunfight, you know. Meanwhile, and I'll add, this entire time that this gunfight is happening, the Israeli captives are just sitting in the helicopters that were transported to the airfield, just still all tied up, right? German police try to push the terrorists away from the helicopters with like this infantry assault using like some, armored vehicles and shit, to try to separate them from the helicopters so they can secure the captives. Sadly, the terrorists caught wind of this plan, and one of the terrorists tossed a grenade into one of the helicopters that was holding 5 of the captives. That helicopter exploded, killed all 5 of them and the pilot. Shortly after, another terrorist shot and killed the last 4 hostages in the other helicopter. So by the end of this fight, we have 11 Israelis killed, 1 policeman, and 5 terrorists. And the remaining 3 terrorists were captured and put under arrest by the West German government.
So how it's just like one of those security lapses that makes you kind of like rub your head. Like the Olympic Village should be the most secure place on earth, right?
You would
because
think
these are obviously the casualty number is way worse now than in October 7th than it was back then, but it's still like, imagine what the response would be if U.S. athletes were taken hostage and murdered.
Yeah, it'd be insane
by terror militants.
Mm-hmm.
Like there would be a insane response. It would be maybe not adjacent to what our response was in 9/11, but I think it would be pretty. It would be pretty strong.
Pissed. Yeah,
because it's also just really a attack on your nation because
your nation's there to represent your nation.
Yeah, you're representing your nation. These are supposed to be the best of your nation,
mm-hmm.
and I wonder what the motive really was. I guess besides if there was an if there was another motive besides just doing a prisoner swap, but how could something this bad have happened?
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question, we have to go over some like historical context, but also we have to take a look at some of the like glaringly idiotic decisions that the West Germans like made leading up to and during the massacre. So we can start with the context. That historical context is that the 1972 Olympics in West Germany was like kind of like a do-over event, propaganda-wise for the Germans. Like 36 years earlier, if you remember, Hitler hosted the Olympics and used it as an opportunity to showcase like fascism and like Aryan supremacy bullshit, So this Olympic like event was supposed to act like kind of like a juxtaposition of that like fascist one that they did prior. The return to Germany for the Olympics was, it sends like an important political message, for Germany, kind of like, we're back and we're not evil anymore, like that was the intent of this Olympic Games, and to support this idea, they literally named the event the Olympics of Peace and Joy, or the Cheerful Games. Like this is what they were like branding the event. And to make sure that nobody got any fascist vibes while they were there, they literally didn't hire any armed security. Like, I'm not kidding. There were no military or police pretty much anywhere on site. They spent.
I mean, come on. West Germany is a U.S. colony, and there's no military police.
That's what they decided.
Like U.S. troops there.
They thought it would give everybody the weirds if there was like military present. They thought it would like be reminiscent of the Nazi times again. You know, you remember this is like the return of Germany to like the world stage again after the Third Reich had fallen, right? So like they didn't want to display themselves as like, oh, we're militant again. Like, how did Germany get militant again? I thought we fucking crushed them in the Second World War, you know? Like, so they were really trying to put on this like, I don't know, propaganda facade that, oh no, we're chill. Like we're just like hippies, you know, like we don't need guns here. It's just, you know, we're just having fun, you know? That was the idea. It's truly like a political propaganda choice not to have police or military visible anywhere.
And what they spend less than $2 million on the security for the event
in general. Yeah.
So, and I'm assuming $2 million is like, if you compare that now
we're talking about then money, so it's going to be more now, but like still we're talking like it's hundreds of millions of dollars in security now. It wasn't even close to being enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, you know, this could be like
just to deal with the drunks, right? And the hooligans and the drunks.
Exactly. Like they just had enough security for the drunk people, and to like make sure people had tickets, you know. But I mean, this is a bit of a chicken and the egg because after 1972, the whole world starts spending a lot of money on security for the Olympic events, right? So, you know, maybe this is the reason why. But it was just like it was a stupid idea in the first place to not have any armed security there, like at all. It's crazy. That lack in security was the first of the major mistakes that the Germans made. And this mistake meant, you know, that for the terrorists, like literally all they needed to do to wreak havoc was to just jump a 7-foot fence. That was it. There was no other physical, like preventative security measures that were stopping them from doing terrorism. They just hopped the fence, which is kind of nuts, right? It's hard to overlook
Hamas
that.
Kind of just hopped the fence.
Say what?
Well, Hamas kind of just hopped the fence.
They literally jumped on paragliders.
They jumped dead ramps and they exploded it. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that was a major operation. They didn't just hop a fence. Yeah. Plus, also that fence is like 20 foot tall or some shit like that. That is a different caliber of fence that they were hopping
with like robotic machine guns and
like
towers
the fence
everywhere.
Can hear, you know, like that was a different kind of fence. This is just like a regular ass little, you know, chain link fence that's 7 foot tall.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Some shitty fence. They just jumped it and
they just jumped it. They just walked right in, basically. It's a glaringly stupid decision.
Don't worry about security. We have latest.
This is the cheerful games. We do not need guns here. There is no problems. We are just playing games. That's all.
We're just playing games.
You know, it's just stupid. Just stupid decision.
Greco-Roman wrestling.
Yeah. It literally keeps getting worse from here, though. So before the event even started, the West German authorities hired a forensic psychologist. His name was Dr. Georg Sieber, to look into basically like what are the possible threats, you know, at the Olympics, and you know, have him do like a worst case scenario list, you know. And Sieber came up with 26 possible security threats to the games, and number 21 on his list was basically exactly what happened, right? So situation 21 predicted an event where a Palestinian terrorist organization would break into the Olympics, kill people and take hostages from the Israeli quarters and use them to try and get, you know, political prisoners free. He literally called it. Like he said, this is one of the 26 things that could happen.
But it must have been low on the likelihood.
Well, I don't know if they were stack ranked, you know, in order, in which case 21 would be pretty low on that list. But I mean, the fact is that he did predict it.
Well, I mean, they probably rated, if it's a numeral list, then it probably starts with the most
It's not
likely.
a YouTube video. 26 ways that you can destroy the Olympics.
Yeah.
No, it's like I don't know if it was like in order or not, but it doesn't. I guess that's kind of not the point. The kind of crazy point is that he actually, one of the 26 things actually did happen, almost exactly. And the crazier part about this is that the Olympic organizers knew about his predictions, right? Like they contracted him to make them. And even though they contracted him to make those predictions, they still didn't do anything about any of those 26 things. They didn't create any.
Well, you can imagine that if this one was, if this scenario was just not, there was no premeditated preventive actions against it. Imagine what some of the other things were, or maybe they just kind of concentrated everything else on the Russians or the Soviet Union.
I guess what I'm trying to
rolling
point
their
out,
tanks
Henry,
through
is that they didn't do anything to prevent any of the 26, not just number 21.
Oh, any of the 26.
They didn't do shit. Like they didn't do anything. Like they got this list, they contracted it just to check off a box, and they're like, oh, okay, cute, 26 reasons. All right, cool. We're not going to do anything, but thanks for the list. They didn't do anything. This is an organization that spent, like I said, less than $2 million on their security. They did nothing about this, and some of the things that they could have done, wouldn't have cost them anything. One of the things that Sieber was saying was you could house the Olympians based on their sport rather than based on their countries, and that would help, basically spread out the Israelis among the rest of the population, right? So all the weightlifters would be in the weightlifting house, and all the track and field people would be in the track house, and shit like that. So it would make it more difficult for number 21 to happen, because they wouldn't be all concentrated in the same spot, right? And even the Israelis were expressing concerns over the security of their apartments when they saw the layout of the village, because they thought that specific location was kind of out in the outskirts, that location put them at risk of an attack, and they still didn't do anything about it. So, there's a lot of shit going on right here where just this organization that set up the Olympics were just trying to be yo, shut up.
What the thing is, though, is that in the 70s, the Israelis aren't the only group that have who are in a struggle like this.
For sure.
There's other groups that would require security from terrorist threats as well. Mm-hmm. That would include the British with the Troubles. That would include the Spanish national team with the Basque terrorist. There's more than one. It seems like they just dropped the ball. Because you could see those scenarios playing out where there could have been a hostage crisis with other teams, right, given just the Cold War environment. Right.
But they didn't do anything about any of those. So they were just no, we're fine. Here's an interesting bit. In 2012, the German newspaper Der Spiegel actually reported a claim that a Palestinian informant had tipped off the West German Foreign Ministry about the attack. So this is, of course, allegedly, but allegedly the ministry knew about it, and they actually believed that tip was credible, and they passed that information on to Munich, the authorities in Munich. But again, Munich authorities just straight up didn't act on it, and they did nothing to increase the security. So on top of it, they're getting this from multiple sides, right? There's Sieber's hey, this could happen. Israelis are hey, I don't like this. This is sketchy. A fucking Palestinian's hey, they're about to do this thing. And Munich was just nah, we're good.
This is all want to ruin the games.
Yeah. This is all before.
Overzealous.
Yeah, before the games even started. And during the event, there's some very clear shit that went wrong as well. And what's interesting about this event, this massacre, was that almost 1 billion people watched this happen live on TV. Satellite TV was a thing then. They were broadcasting this shit live. And among the people that were watching this event while it was happening live were the terrorists themselves. Apparently, the German authorities never shut the electricity off, and it allowed them to have access to the media's reporting of the event as it was happening in real time. So they'd had eyes outside, and some of the things that they were seeing among the commentary and all the other stuff was like literally showing where the snipers were positioned in the Olympic Village. Like there was this one bit where they were going to try and storm the apartment building, and the terrorists can literally see the German army, like the excuse me, not the German army, but the Munich police department, like trying to climb over a building to get into position to like raid the thing. And their terrorists was like, yo, if you fucking move on us, we're going to kill we're going to kill these people. So like back off. So
makes sense why people, it kind of makes you think why, I guess it makes sense why people from the 70s or people who grew up in the 70s are so pro-Israel.
Yeah, right.
Imagine watching this as like an 18-year-old. I
know. I mean, pretty much everyone knew that there was like a hostage situation that was happening at the time because of this. And it's very interesting because some of the parallels here is like, this is one of the first times that you can watch a terrorism unfold in real time, you know? Because it was just such a large event and so many people were already watching for the Olympics. It's a very fascinating case study, but I mean, you would think that they would just like cancel the Olympics for safety reasons or whatever, because of this, but they didn't. After he learned about the attacks, this guy, Avery Brundage, who was the president of the Olympics committee at the time, he declared that the games must go on, and they all started promptly at 8:15 in the morning. In the meantime, this Brundage guy, he spent his day pressuring the German officials to get the Israelis out of the village so that the Olympics could just carry on in peace, like figure out a way to get them out. And it took them 10 hours before they finally decided to suspend the Olympics. 10 whole hours. Can you imagine that shit? Can you imagine? That would be like, remember that in October 7th, there was that music festival, right? That got raided. That would be like the organizer of the music festival being like, nah, we have to keep the festival going.
Let's keep the party going.
Keep the music going, right? Like just keep the music going. It's fine. And then go into the police and be like, yo, can you just get these terrorists out of here so that we can continue our music festival? Like that's how brazen this shit was. It's just like offensive, you know?
This was the time of Bruce Jenner, you know?
Yeah.
To see him, America's hero.
That's right.
Yeah, this is a pretty crazy story.
It keeps getting worse, dude. Remember that botched?
Wait, Germany has never held another Olympics, right?
I don't think so. Maybe they might be banned. Let's Google
Maybe
that.
A lot of pressure on them.
Okay, you get them on 36, 72. That's it.
I guess that ship has sailed.
Yeah, they had the Winter and the Summer Olympics in 36, and they had the Summer Olympics in 72. That's it.
What's the next Olympic city? The last one was Japan. The last Summer Olympics was in Japan.
Anyway, while we look that up, so remember that botched rescue mission at the end of the story that I was telling you about before, where the snipers like missed and shit. Well,
yes,
that story is actually it's actually a lot worse than I originally let on. So remember I was telling you about that flight crew, the cops that were dressed as like, you know, flight attendants and shit, and how they ditched their mission. Well, apparently these guys didn't have radios. Like they didn't give them radios, so they straight up could not communicate with anyone. Like not the command post or even the snipers in the field. Like nobody. So they had no idea what was going on, and so they decided to pull out by themselves. You know who else didn't have radios? The snipers. Also, the snipers didn't actually have sniper rifles. They had assault rifles that didn't have long-range scopes. Also, they didn't have night vision or bulletproof vests or anything like that. Also, there weren't enough snipers, and we know this, right? The Munich police sent 5, and there was actually 8 terrorists. So, they should have put like 2 to 3 snipers in per terrorist in the first place. That would have helped a ton. And this is the most important part. The snipers weren't actually snipers. These guys were like just cops from the Munich police department that volunteered for the mission. They had 0 specialized training or expertise whatsoever. They were just cops with the wrong guns.
And what makes it worse, though, is that I read that they had the Munich police. They had an option to actually hire trained professionals for this, but they went with the volunteer force anyway.
That's right. Prime Minister Golda Meir, Israeli Prime Minister, she actually sent the Mossad chief over to Munich, to support this, and she directed him to negotiate for the use of these Israeli commandos called the Sayeret. To do the hostage rescue. And the German chancellor, Willy Brandt, he was totally down, but the local state officials refused. And according to the German federal constitution, that kind of decision was in the hands of the state officials and not the executive office. So they had real strong states' rights on this. But yeah, they could have had badass Israeli commandos handle it. Instead, they got volunteer cops with the wrong guns and not enough of them and no radios. And that was all a choice, or several choices, actually. It's just fucking nuts. Now, it's worth noting that I haven't actually learned why the state officials in Munich decided to deny the help from the Israeli special forces. I don't know, maybe it was pride. Honestly, it could have been leftover Nazis not wanting to work with Jews. I honestly don't know. I'm only speculating at this point, but I don't actually know the answer to that. Whatever the case was,
it's not too long after World War II, so it could be the case.
A lot of the police in West Germany was Nazis. I mean, if you go back and listen to some of the Baader Meinhof episodes, a big gripe that these leftist extremists were having was that hey, there's still Nazis here, and they run everything. Especially, the police forces. So entirely possible that these guys were just Nazis. So, but I don't know.
Or at least held on to some of the anti-Semitic views,
right,
of the old Nazi regime.
That's right. They might have been. Maybe they weren't straight up Nazis, but they had those views, and they were like, well, we can do our jobs. We don't need fucking Israelis to come in here and do our jobs for us. We got this, right? So
could have been just overall hubris. We don't need a foreign country coming in here or telling us what to do. Or it could have just been, we don't need these Jews coming in here and telling us what to do. We can handle this.
Could have been.
You never know.
But whatever the case,
you can only speculate.
Yeah. Whatever the case was, though, the German police definitely lacked the expertise, the experience, and just the basic equipment to pull off this hostage rescue operation. So this was, regardless of how you look at it, right? Regardless of the reasons, this was doomed to fail. This wasn't going to go well. And then after the event, it gets even worse. So there's this press conference the next morning, and the Munich police commissioner, he tried to explain the whole debacle away by saying, hey, those terrorists, they were too clever. They're real professional guys. That's why we couldn't get this done. That was their argument, that the terrorists were just too smart. Those clever terrorists. Now, given all the stupid shit that the Germans did before and during the event, this explanation was obviously just offensive, and the West German police were also super critical of Golda Meir's just absolute resistance to cooperate in any of the negotiations with the terrorists. They were trying to say if Golda Meir would have just negotiated with these terrorists, we wouldn't have had to, get into this shootout, and everyone would have maybe been still alive. This was some of the talking points they were trying to bring up, which is kind of crazy, right? And it started kicking off this finger pointing storm, which, kind of making some of these comparisons here. I feel like, when the dust settles for October 7th, hopefully there is an independent, investigation that looks into how was it that, the Hamas was able to pull off this terrorist attack, under the nose of the IDF and the fucking Mossad and all these other people that are set there to protect Israeli citizens. And I bet we're probably going to find out that there's a lot of stupid shit, like a bunch of stupid decisions that were made on the Israeli side that enabled Hamas to get this done. And what we're going to see is probably super similar to what happened in 72. It's just going to be this big finger pointing storm. It's like, oh no, it's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. Right. And going back.
Yeah, there's enough, political will to, Israel kind of has this like basic survival thing where they do uphold the rule of law, at least when it comes to their own. So they will throw in. They have thrown prime ministers in jail.
I don't know. Bibi's still around.
Yeah, Bibi's still around.
He's been convicted. So
the turd that won't flush, right?
I know. Seriously.
But there's like this basic need to hold people accountable, just due to they can't have like a competency crisis there because it would be a threat to their survival.
Side note, Golda Meir actually the year later after the 73 war, she's
forced to resign because she fucked
leaves.
up the 73.
So but 72, 72 was just the precursor to that. She was like, ah, shit, couldn't do shit in 72, couldn't do shit in 73. She was out.
Yeah, she was gone after that.
Back to Golda, though, in her official statement, after this finger pointing at her, she warns that Israel will persevere in her struggle against the terrorist organizations and will not absolve their accomplices from responsibility for terrorist actions. So basically, she's saying, hey, we're not going to just let this drop. We're going to find out who helped them get this done, and we're going to hold them responsible. And later, these unnamed Israeli sources identify who those accomplices were, and they name Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon as like these accomplice nations. And this pisses Egypt off like a lot. They end up accusing West German police of making false charges against Egypt when they were pointing the finger at them for not cooperating, when the terrorists were asking to get flown to Cairo. And then they place the responsibility of the deaths on the hostages on the West German police, and they were claiming that it was the West German police's bullets that killed the hostages. Sometime later, we find out in these investigations, it was said that it was a very high possibility that at least some of these hostages were actually shot accidentally by these German snipers during the shootout, but that it was too difficult to tell on account of the bodies were all totally burnt up because they were burned up in the helicopter explosions. It's entirely possible that they got shot by the Germans, like in a friendly fire.
So the guys that weren't killed in the helicopter from the grenade, the guys who were gunned down. Yeah. So the Israelis were saying that
the Egyptians were saying the Germans.
Oh, the Egyptians were saying that the Germans. Okay, the Egyptians were saying that the West Germans killed them
accidentally
in friendly fire, accidentally.
Right. But that they were actually responsible for those deaths. Crazy, right? Everyone's pointing
I've
fingers
heard
at
that.
each other.
I've actually read that before too. I wasn't sure if that was real. That the West German police were the ones who were responsible for killing those hostages in the shootout. But I didn't see any evidence of it. But I don't know if it comes from that claim from the Egyptians or not.
Yeah, it could. But in general, nobody was involved in this thing was ever actually punished for these mistakes that were made. Like that dude Schreiber, the police chief, he stays the police chief until 1983. On the other side, Georg Sieber, the psychologist, the guy who predicted situation number 21, he ends up getting fired hours after the attack as a part of a cover-up attempt. They straight up fired him. They were like, "No, we got to silence this guy."
So the guy who predicted
the exact
not
situation.
predicted, but the person who drew out the risk scenarios for the event, and he's the one who was sacked. Maybe because he didn't put
hours after the attack.
It could be
maybe. And of those three, this is the worst part, dude. So remember, 5 of the terrorists were killed during the gunfight, but 3 of them were captured. by West Germany. And those remaining 3 Black September guys, they end up getting released less than 2 months after the incident, because in an unrelated and separate incident, a different Black September group ends up hijacking a Lufthansa flight that was on its way from Syria to Munich, and threatened to blow it up unless those 3 prisoners were released. And get this, officials in West Germany, without talking to Israel at all, immediately let those prisoners go, so that no one, so effectively nobody was brought to justice for this. And the people who died during the thing, okay, they died, right? But their bodies got sent to Libya, or was it Lebanon? I forget. One of those 2 L countries. Their bodies got sent back, and they were considered martyrs and heroes. And then the 3 guys that got let out. So there's that.
So here's where we're at. So I want to understand. So this complete debacle, national disgrace for West Germany. Also, sort of I don't want to say it's even a humiliation for the Israelis, because in this case, it's really not their fault. However, unless you want to, put that on the blame of the no hostage, the not negotiating with them or not. But it certainly seems that the onus is really on the West German police here.
Yeah, kind of.
What I'm interested in exploring is obviously what the response is for this from Israel in its 1970s version, because the response that we're looking at right now to October 7th, where we've both discussed and we both have said that this is the wrong approach to effectively bomb indiscriminately and kill civilians, and from the cynical point of view of this is going to create more resistance sympathy if you do a mass bombing campaign. In this way, the difference between Israel back then is what they essentially did is they took these guys out one by one.
Yep.
And they did it through an assassination campaign.
That's right.
Where they found them and they killed them. And
right.
there was definitely some civilian collateral, which I'm sure we'll get into.
There was.
But there wasn't, the death count we're at right now.
Deaths.
Yeah, today is November 15th. It's 10 p.m. They even stopped using the death count, so we don't even know how high it is. But it stopped at 11,000, and it's been like 3 days since there's been an update.
Right. Chances
are there's probably a lot more, and those have been the estimates from the UN, where they believe that the numbers that are coming from Gaza are actually much higher than the one stated. So we're dealing with like a huge humanitarian crisis. In this case study, the Israelis they deal with this without
dropping any bombs.
Humanitarian crisis. And yes, before someone starts screaming and at the phone or the app that they're listening to, well, it's a different situation. There's so many more casualty numbers. I understand that this is different, but still, you got to learn lessons from the past.
Right. And it's an option, and I'm wondering if this option could have been, if this lever could have been pulled instead. Yeah. So,
but let's get into it.
Let's talk about that. So Golda Meir, she was feeling obviously pretty pissed about the failed rescue mission in Germany, especially.
Yeah, you think she was feeling pretty pissed about the failed.
She's fucking pissed attack. Because obviously her people died and that sucks. But I think what made her even more upset about it was that she literally couldn't do anything about it. Right? She was offering her commandos to get it done, and those were turned down. Now, publicly, though, she did praise the German police efforts in Munich, but deep down and quietly among her cabinet, she, was no compromise against these terrorists again. And so this leads Prime Minister Meir to come up with a new counterterrorism strategy, and she gets General Aharon Yariv on board as her counterterrorism advisor, and she convinces the Israeli cabinet to form this top secret counter-terrorist committee named Committee X, which is a really badass sounding name. This committee, which she co-chaired with the defense minister Moshe Dayan, was all about figuring out how to respond to that Munich massacre. Their plan, as you pointed out, Henry, was to basically assassinate anyone linked to Black September, which was the group that was behind the Munich massacre. And Committee X gives the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, basically the job to hunt down these Black September guys, and with the express goal of creating terror among the terrorists. I mean, like we're coming for you, So this guy Mike Harari, he's from the Mossad. He takes charge of this operation, and he works closely with this other guy, Abraham Gemmer, in Paris, which becomes their European operations base. Committee X basically decided to hit back after this incident, and they got this guy Mike Harari and some of the higher ups to put up a plan that was honestly pretty outside of the box. The idea was to create several different assassination teams, each of them doing their own thing without knowing about the others or what the others were doing, or even indeed the existence of the others. And this way, they hope to cover all of their bases, with each team picking up the slack for another one if somebody missed something, right? And there's two main types of teams here. We got a standard issue Mossad team. This is your classic spy setup. This team is made up of mostly just Mossad's staff officers, and these guys are supported by recruits from their regional networks, and they followed the usual Mossad playbook. An example of this type of team is what went down in Lillehammer, which was a mission that did not go as planned and got a lot of media attention. We'll talk more about that later. And then the other type of team that they had was the Avner team, and this one's a bit more Hollywood. They got some of their best people, but instead of keeping them under direct government control, they basically let them operate independently. This team only had contact with Harari through these secret signals, and they were financially backed through Swiss accounts. So they were basically ghost operatives. They were totally off the grid, and they were they got a mission, and they were just figure it out. Figure however you need to do it, get it done.
And then the other team was Zohan.
Zohan?
Yeah.
No, it's just the standard Mossad, operations.
Zohan? No, I was saying, making a joke. The third team was Zohan. Zohan was the other team.
No. Anyway, a lot of what we know about this Avner team, though, comes from from George Jonas's book Vengeance, where Avner, who's a former Mossad agent, he basically spills the beans and tells all about it, all about that program. By the way, his name isn't actually Avner; it's something else. This is his code name. While the Israeli government admits that they did send out these teams to go after these terrorists after Munich, they're obviously very quiet, very hush-hush about how they did it and where they did it, who did it, etc. There's a lot of speculation, and some people say that a lot of these assassinations were from these quote unquote wrath of God assassination teams, but who knows if that's just a media name or something that Israel actually used to freak out the PLO or whatever. But what's super clear is that these teams, these Mossad teams, they definitely knew what they were doing. They were very experienced. They liked using these Beretta 22 caliber pistols. They were quiet. They were effective. You know the drill, right? And turns out inside the Mossad there was a whole section dedicated to this kind of shadowy and assassination business. Pretty fascinating shit.
So let's talk about the actual apparitions. I feel like we're both speaking, slurring our words right now. It's kind of weird.
I promise I'm not drinking.
Apparitions. I got a baby, man.
Yeah, the different operations.
What are the different things they did to kill these guys? You got to use the simplest words as possible.
Well, I think we should talk about how they fucked up first, right? Because
because there was a big fuck up in Lillehammer.
Yeah, that one's,
we can get into that.
Crazy. So they attempted to assassinate this guy Ali Hassan Salame in Lillehammer in Norway in 1973. Salame was,
and this guy is allegedly the leader of Black September.
Exactly, right? He's super huge, big deal.
So he's like a rich playboy, kind of weird guy who has like Ferraris and shit and travels around the world.
Yeah, he's like a fucking playboy wannabe, right? So
he's
Ferrari,
like not Jamal Khashoggi, Jamal Khashoggi's uncle, Adnan Khashoggi.
Yeah, it's like one of those types. So Harari, the big shot guy in the Mossad, he was obviously running the show for this mission, and he picked 5 of his own guys for this hit squad. And normally, like, the Mossad would use a special unit called the Kidon, which means the bayonet, to get this job done. Like, those guys are the like most elite of the elite that are specifically trained for kidnapping and killing. But for some reason, Harari didn't go with the Kidon for this particular mission. He goes with just a different set of individuals. And after chasing a lot of false leads for about a year, the Mossad finally get a tip that Salome was in Lillehammer in Norway. And so they jumped on this intel and they send the team over to Norway, and the crew included some pretty heavy hitters, guys like Dan Arbel and Abraham Gamer, plus like a support team that was doing surveillance and setting up, safe houses and shit like that. So whole operation goes to Norway. And here's where it goes south. So on July 21st, 1973, the hit squad mistakes a guy for Salome. So they get the wrong guy, and they shoot him dead in front of a pregnant woman who turns out to be his wife. And the man they killed was actually named Ahmed Bouchiki, who was just a Moroccan waiter, like a nobody in particular. And he obviously wasn't the terrorist mastermind that they were looking for.
He just happened to look like
he was just a brown guy in Norway.
He was just the one other brown guy in Norway.
Yeah, he was the brown guy in Norway at the time, and they killed him. Which I know it's like it's so absurd because I don't know how to have a different response other than like how absurd that is. It makes you want to laugh, I mean, it's fucked up, but it does.
I mean, it is. You just got to laugh at fucked up situations sometimes, but it is kind of funny to joke about it. It's like they just found the one Arab guy in Norway, and they're like, there he is, get him.
Yeah. After all that fucking work that they put in, right? They sent dozens of people over, right? To set up fucking safe houses and like support networks and all this other shit. And they get the wrong guy, right?
Well, so the thing that's that kind of drives me crazy is that the guy that they were looking for, it's not like there was no fucking photos of him. This guy had many photos. It wasn't like some secret. He wasn't like Avon Barksley or something where his identity was secret and he didn't refuse to, to have photographs. There's photos everywhere. This guy's like a famous person.
Right.
And they couldn't
tell him apart from this poor Moroccan waiter who happened to be basically the wrong place at the wrong time. It's crazy.
Well, that is quite a shitty situation.
So that's obviously shitty, and that was botched. But the getaway was clumsy too. Apparently, they jumped in a Mazda for the original hit, and then they switched to a Peugeot. But then the next day they used that same Peugeot to go to the airport. So different types of cars, but they just used the same car that they were used for the hit the day before. Total rookie move. Like they should have got a third car. And that's how the cops end up catching them in Norway, because they were looking for this Peugeot, right? Because they get this report that like, fucking this guy gets assassinated in the street. And I guess somebody must have noticed that they were driving a Peugeot and they were looking for it, and they used the same fucking car. Stupid. They get caught. And so Dan Arbel and Marianne Gladnikoff, who were parts of the team, they were both arrested then. And then the police basically interrogate them, and they crack wide open the entire operation. Like they spill the beans, basically. And they lead the cops to the rest of the team and a bunch of safe houses that were in Norway and a shit ton of incriminating evidence. It was an absolute disaster for the Mossad. And then the safe houses that were set up in Paris got blown, and loads of other secret information was out in the open. So it was an operational nightmare for the Mossad there. 6 of the team members ended up on trial, and 5 got prison sentences. But get this, despite the severity of that fuck up, they were all released in less than 2 years. So this whole Lillehammer incident showed some giant flaws in, the Mossad's operations, and basically, left a stain on their record. Crazy story.
Well, they would be, I mean, if we had operatives overseas pulling off assassinations, they probably wouldn't be held accountable for something like that.
No, probably not. Which is like the morally, that's the moral question behind this approach. Like, we can say all we want about like how we don't like that that Israel is currently dropping bombs on Gaza, and the civilian casualty rate is so excessively high. And so, one of the options that they could be taking is perhaps doing these targeted killings, these assassinations. But even then, the morality, especially when you think about the fuck ups like Lilyhammer, it starts getting questionable, So you're fucked if you do, and you're fucked if you don't. It's kind of unfortunate.
Well, I mean, they took out Sheikh Yassin just by monitoring him and then dropping a bomb on him when he was in a car.
That's true.
They took him out alone. They didn't need some like crazy bombing campaign.
Yeah, it's possible. But, it's definitely possible. So let's talk about like Avner, because Avner's like Avner's team actually got shit done. So this guy was like the covert squad, the one that kind of acted on their own. Again, most of what we know about them comes from the book Vengeance, and the team was led after the guy whose code name was Avner. Super secret commando unit, a bunch of different random experts. Like think like they're good at making fake IDs and bombs and small arms, and like some of them do banking and have business skills. But all of them can also do each other's jobs too. So they're like very specifically picked so that they have like multiple different skills. And the operation style was super unconventional. It was more like U.S. Special Forces than traditional military. They didn't have like a strict hierarchy or procedures. They're all about like being super flexible and blending in. Harari's plan for them was basically to disrupt and disorient terrorist groups by straight up killing their leaders and causing chaos in those ranks. And to keep things under wraps, the whole team like quit the Mossad, right? And so this was to avoid any paper trail that can link them back to the Israeli government. And the team was basically a mix of, a bunch of different guys. And once they were in for good. Like there was no turning around. Like you're in until the mission is over. And the idea was to stay operational until they either finished that mission or they like died or couldn't continue. So one of the generals from Israel gave them a hit list of top targets, and it included big names like Ali Hassan, Salameh, same guy, Abu Daub, among a bunch of others. And they all had roles in terrorist activities or were high-ranking PLO officials. And so they were going after a bunch of these guys. And before they got started, Harari got them all together for this big crash course on their targets. And, they headed to Geneva to set up their first base. And Harari had two, except for the fact that he was like, okay, do whatever you got to do to get it done. He only had two really big rules. One of them was like, be really creative, and when you go to assassinate them, like be as creative as you can. And the second rule was make 100% sure that you're killing the right person, right? No collateral damage allowed. So they learned a little bit from the Lilyhammer incident, of course. And so this team split up across Europe to gather intel. They even worked with the Baader-Meinhof group at one point for logistical support, believe it or not, which is crazy. And their first big hit ended up in Rome, where they successfully took out Wael Zweiter, who was a PLO guy. And then they hooked up with this other group in France called Le Groupe, which is an underground intel service by the French resistance veteran. And they helped with a bunch of missions. And one of those missions was actually rigging up a phone to explode and take out another PLO guy, Mahmoud Hamsari, which is crazy. Like, put a bomb in a phone. It's nuts. It sounds like some fucking James Bond shit, There's obviously like hiccups along the way. There was a mission in Beirut where they had to share intel with the Mossad for a larger military operations, and things got weird. And one of Avner's guys got killed by a freelance assassin, which led them to break protocol and go after her. But by the end of the 2-year run that they were on, Avner's team basically had taken out a significant number of their targets, but also faced some losses and some moral dilemmas, as you can imagine. Pretty much, that was it. I mean, in the end, the team was a mix of these successes and tragedies, but they did actually manage to eliminate several key figures. There was some collateral damage, but indeed not nearly on the scale that we're seeing today. And of course, there were some serious ethical questions, right? Like, is it cool to put assassins in other sovereign nations and just with impunity just kill people? I don't know. It's an interesting case study.
Well, I think that beats the current approach, to be completely honest. For sure. If you want to weigh the ethics, but I don't know if we want to talk too much about the situation in Gaza right now, because we're almost an hour and 20 minutes into the show, but maybe we should end with it. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about that you think is relevant.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I thought about maybe going into, but given the time, is like looking at the U.S. like perspective in here and like foreign involvement for this. But maybe we can save that for another episode or another time. Let's just end with maybe just thinking about like how this compares and contrasts to October 7th.
So, I mean, the response to October 7th has been to, essentially level the city. And, honestly, I follow this every day. I'm really not sure what the hell's going on with that hospital, if there's really like a Hamas command center under there or not. Maybe there is. Mm-hmm. There very well could be. There very well could not be. The major issue that I have now is that, well, there's a lot of major issues, just like the vast murder of people under 18 and children being on the top of that. But the other issue is that I think that Israel's harming itself, really, in the long run, because they're politically isolating themselves on the world stage by carrying this out. And basically global opinion is against them. So they're losing the PR war. And you can kind of see that was happening back in 2021, right after Biden became president, when they were bombing, when there was that Hamas rocket attack in response to, these settler provocations.
In Al-Aqsa,
and Israel bombed a bunch of, they killed about 600 people or so in the last conflict. It wasn't nearly as high as it was, but it was like 500, 600
people. Is like a lot of people, that's just...
It was a pretty significant bombing campaign. It had been the worst one since probably like 2018.
Right.
So
the material damage was super high on that one too. Isn't that when didn't they level the AP building for that one?
Yeah, they leveled the AP building. But with that, you can kind of see that, I think it was just mainly due to Twitter, that public opinion turned on them very quickly. Now, in this case, and also a lot of people kind of understood that there was a pretty big provocation with, like, everyone saw that video of the settlers dancing in front of the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't, the Temple Mount wasn't on fire, but there was a tree on fire, and it looked like a Klan rally.
It really did. Yeah. It was
bad. So, with that, there was more public. The Israelis can get away with. They weren't able to get away with as much. Now, with October 7th, this was a humongous loss of life, and
on both sides, frankly. Yeah.
Well, I'm just talking about from the Israeli perspective. There's this humongous loss of life. I think the body count came out today. I think the official one, it was 1,200 dead, around 1,200 dead. I think 700 were citizens, and then the rest were between IDF and police. So I might be quoting those numbers wrong, so don't take my word on it, but I think it's something along those lines. But obviously there's a tremendous outpouring of global support for them in the wake of the attack. But the fact that they went and they started, let's just call it what it is. Let's not act like these were are targeted attacks. These indiscriminate bombing campaigns. You don't kill 10,000 people, or more than 10,000 people, unless you're being completely reckless or uncaring about the collateral damage. That's quickly turned people against it. Even my conservative family is like, what the fuck? This is horrible. My conservative family that's been pro-Israel forever is like, this is like pretty atrocious and we don't stand for this. So they're creating enemies, and they're creating... We said this the first day we started covering it. And we said that they can't kill their way out of this.
Yeah.
They won't be able to make enough of a dent. And I'm saying this in like a pure kind of Machiavellian way.
Right.
Like
Realpolitik kind of.
If I was a maniac, even if they killed 100,000 people in Gaza, that's like 5% of the population.
Right.
Those people will have kids, and they'll come back and they'll hate you more.
Right.
They're not going away. They're not going away unless you, and literally, and this is what a lot of Israelis say, until there's a final type solution where they've literally pushed them out into the Sinai Desert, where there's documents from Israeli intelligence organizations that say that's one of the plans, which have been proven, verified. We don't know if that is the plan, but it was at least one of the plans that are floating among some of the plans. And if they do that, then I don't know what the consequences would be.
It wouldn't solve it either, right? You're just moving them out of Gaza and just across the border to the Sinai. You're still probably going to have massive refugee camps on the Sinai border, like on the other side of the Rafah crossing, and then they're just going to do the same thing that they did in Gaza, but now on the other side, right? Like they're going to, even the IDF themselves keep saying like, hey, every 2 years, like we keep hitting these guys and blowing up their tunnels, and every 2 years there's new tunnels. You don't think they're just not going to do that on the other side? Like, of course they're going to do that. So like, either the way I look at it is like, okay, you need to do something, right? And I hear, the argument on the Israeli side about like, collateral damage sucks, but like they're not targeting civilians, and I don't buy that excuse, but let's pretend for a moment that they're not, that they are indeed trying to be as targeted as possible, and they're sending out the roof knocks and they're sending out the leaflets to tell people to get out, and unfortunately there still people there because Gaza is so densely populated, and it's nearly impossible to move that many people that quickly, to not put them in harm's way. So there's collateral damage, and they kill 10,000 people. But my issue with this is that how many Hamas fighters have died so far? 60, something like the last count I've seen.
I don't think anyone knows right now.
But
like I don't think you could. From what I've been reading,
counts I read, it was like incredibly low. Like the number of high-ranking like Hamas people is incredibly low. So like that means our hit rate is what is 60 over 10,000? 60 over 10,000 is 0.006.
I think it is. I think it's well over 60 people. Since you're not talking about the day of October 7th, we're talking about the
since then
plus October 7th.
Yes, we're talking about since
I think
then.
That number is higher. Again, it's hard to follow the military situation.
I think any number is like when doing the math against the collateral damage, any number comes out to an unreasonable collateral damage number. Yeah. Right? Like okay, maybe it's not 60. Is it 200? Is it 1,000, right? So even if it was 1,000, right? 1,000 of those to 10,000 civilian, like that's not that's not an acceptable ratio, right? That means that if they are indeed being as targeted as they can, they're just doing a really shit job at it, right? They're not good at it. They're not good at targeting, if that's the ratio that we're coming out of. And that is creating, like you said, way more enemies than potentially the alternative option, which would be like just go send in some special forces and like murder them, That's a possibility.
Yeah, just take them out over a 10-year period. Basically, right. what the Mossad did with these guys. I mean, that seems like the most pragmatic option. But really,
I get it. There's a bloodlust, right? Like there is a vengeance that is demanded right now, and I totally understand it. Like if I was in that situation and my family member was kidnapped or something like that, yeah, I'd also want vengeance. But what's ironic about this is that at this point, the families of the folks that were kidnapped are now being like, yo, chill out, because like my family is still there and no one's talking about freeing them. Like where are these highly trained hostage finding special forces now? The Israeli ones that they were offering to Munich back in 1972. Like, why aren't we using those to try and get the hostages? Now, it's obviously a different situation. This is in enemy territory. They're probably in some tunnels and shit. But like, we don't see that. We don't see that effort. All we see right now, unfortunately, whether it's accurate or not, whether we're only seeing a small component of it or not, all we're seeing is just leveling cities, leveling blocks, and killing children.
Well, it was like what Maho told us. There's clearly not any human intelligence.
No.
Since the Israelis put the siege on Gaza and removed all the settlers there, I don't think they have they really don't know what's going on there. So they can't get intelligence on the ground of where these people are. So they probably don't even have the capability of doing that. So maybe that is a pipe dream to think that they could just go and do this over a 5 to 10 year period. I mean, the U.S. didn't kill bin Laden until how many years after 9/11?
Yeah.
So it is maybe it's unrealistic to think that that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's entirely possible.
In reality though, the real, I think for everyone's sake, and this includes the future of Israel, a political solution has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a political solution there, or this thing is going to go on until the state doesn't exist anymore.
Yep.
It's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
It's just not a sustainable system. You can't have an apartheid state. It's just not sustainable. And I'm not even trying to say this like some leftist college student who's protesting in the street. I'm saying this. I'm just saying what Human Rights Watch says.
Mm-hmm.
What Ben Salem says. What Ehud Barak says, former Prime Minister of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
What Jimmy Carter says. What people have been saying forever, that this is not a sustainable system.
Right.
This is not a sustainable state if within your borders, because the Palestinians are within the Israeli borders because they're being occupied. And if you're going to say that Gaza's not being occupied, then that's just not realistic. I mean, it's a siege, and they control what goes in and out of the city.
Right, they're blockading them on all sides.
So they're blockading them. So by definition, that is an occupation, even if there's not routinely military police types, patrolling it. Until there's some type of state for the Palestinians there, or a one-state type thing where everyone's given equal rights, which honestly would probably not happen, because then Israel would eventually cease being a Jewish majority, and then I think people would immigrate out of it or leave. So maybe that's not realistic either. But until there's some type of like system, and I don't know, it's just like there's been so much shit. It's so hard to look at this and see a positive outcome. I mean, the next steps for Gaza, if you look at them, none of them look attainable. The PLO, not the PLO, the Palestine, the PA going in and becoming like the rulers of Gaza, one being one of them. Now Netanyahu was talking about an Israeli military occupation, bringing in Arab leaders outside, or ethnically cleansing. Like those are like the four options.
UN.
They all
UN,
seem pretty.
UN state would be one as well in Gaza.
Yeah, UN state.
But that's not going to work. If an Israeli occupation didn't work back in the day, and a Israeli blockade didn't work back in the day, and if I remember correctly, Egypt once ruled Gaza, and that didn't work back in the day, then what makes us think that the UN suddenly ruling that area or administering that area is going to work? It's not. They need to be able to rule themselves. And I think the unfortunate part, is there's always the talking point. Well, the Palestinians voted in Hamas, so they must all fucking like Hamas. That was literally the one and only election that they had. So I think they need to be able to have some new freely held and democratic elections, which, I don't even know if Hamas would even let that happen, because the likelihood is that they'll get voted out. People don't actually like Hamas. Matter of fact, the majority of the people that exist in Gaza right now are like so young that they didn't even exist when that vote happened. They had no choice. Remember, again, that was what, 2006 they voted?
They voted in 2006, correct?
Right? So we're in 23. Most of those people are under 18. Like most of the people in Gaza are under 18. So, I mean, you do the math. Most of them didn't vote for Hamas. Yeah, most people didn't vote for, they weren't either born exist. Or they were kids. Or they were children,
So these aren't the people who brought in Hamas as their rulers, but
they didn't do that. Yeah.
I mean, it's dumb anyway. Even if they did, it wouldn't matter anyway, because you're not guilty of the crimes that
collective punishment shouldn't be a thing.
Your elected politicians do. What about all the people who didn't vote for Hamas? Right. And then also, like, hey, if you voted Republican, if you voted for George W. Bush, do you deserve a bomb to drop on your head because of all the Arabs that the U.S. killed?
No. Depends on who you ask. I'm sure there's plenty of groups in the Middle East that feel that way.
If you voted Democrat, if you voted for Lyndon B. Johnson, do you deserve to be napalmed because of all the Vietnamese that the Johnson administration killed?
Nope.
I mean, the U.S. killed millions of Vietnamese.
Right.
Millions.
Right. But it's the burden of like different standards, right? Like we started adopting more strict rules for engaging in warfare and combat because of atrocities like that. Like a lot of these human rights organizations and a lot of the Geneva Conventions dictated that, like, you can't fucking firebomb an entire city. Like, you can't do that anymore. Why? Because Dresden and pretty much every major city in Japan was, eviscerated during Second World War.
It's funny because I hear like super pro Zionist talking about, well, come on, like, we can do this. Look, we did this in Dresden. You're going to say Dresden wasn't justified? And then you're like, wait, Dresden? That's like the one city, that's like the one allied war crime in Europe, or by not the Soviets, that we condemn. The bombing of Dresden is the one. I mean, the U.S. did more atrocities. The U.S. and the British did more atrocities than just Dresden. But that is like the one staple where people are like, okay, Dresden was too far. I mean, obviously the Soviets did horrible things.
I mean, we made rules because of these things, because of those events. You know, we made the rules. The rules like no collective punishment, no indiscriminate bombing. You know, no fucking blockading, no fucking don't do any of those things because we realize those are really bad, right? So it's a different standard back then, and just because it happened doesn't give anyone, frankly, a free pass to do it now in the future.
Yeah, I agree.
We're done.
All right,
we're done with that.
Let's wrap this thing up because we're gonna piss off. We've already pissed off anyone who was just coming to learn about the Munich Massacre, who now listen to the last 10 minutes of it and they're like, "Oh, they fucking liberal, fuck." It's like, "Oh, I was enjoying this until you went on your anti-Israel tirade."
Yeah, right.
We're giving Israel advice, like honestly, the things that we suggest or. I mean, I feel would make Israelis a lot safer. So, who's the pro-Israel person now? I think we are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely pro-Israeli because I want to make sure that
Yeah, the policies that we advocate, that we advocate are always like, hey, like we think that if they do this, that it will create more blowback and make the Jews who live there a lot less safe. Mm-hmm. Including Jews around the world who are not involved with the state of Israel at all, but are blamed for Israelis' actions because you're the Jewish state and you say you speak for all Jews. But like the things that we suggest are things that like would make the country more safe. Yeah, do I have to repeat myself again?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, you remove Israel from this bit if we were suggesting this for the United States, which, by the way, we do, right? We do this for the United States all the time. I think more people would be receptive to the idea of us telling the United States not to indiscriminately bomb brown people in the Middle East.
Or like cops. Like, we've done episodes on like police brutality and stuff. Like the type of things that we suggested that cops don't do, like no-knock raids and things like that,
right,
are things that make their jobs less like dangerous,
less safe,
or no, more safer. They make their jobs safer, not less safe. All right, it's too late. We're getting too much political heaviness right now for being at 10:46. We're not even speaking correct English.
Yeah.
Okay. Peace, everyone. If you want to listen, man, my brain is fucking oatmeal right now. Okay. If you enjoyed this show, make sure that you rate and review the podcast. It is the number one way to support our show. Secondly, you can join us on Patreon, get access to our Slack channel. And thirdly, I was on my friend Jose Nino's show. He has a Slack, not a Slack. He has a Substack where we did something called America Second, where we talk about, if you're interested in like Republican Party politics, I would give it a listen. I'll put it in the links below because we're gonna talk about that from time to time. So make sure you follow that stuff. And then Danny, anything else to say?
Nope.
All right. Okay, everyone. Peace, guys.
Peace.